Let's talk more about the bombing of the hospital in Gaza about 24 hours ago now. Bring in international law expert from the University of Cape Town, Professor Cathy Powell. Cathy, a very good evening to you. Good to have you back on News at Prime. Is there any doubt that a war crime was committed in Gaza last night, whoever is responsible?
Yes, bombing a civilian infrastructure and civilians is a war crime. There are certain precautions that attackers on both sides have to take to ensure that no civilians are harmed, that the target that they're aiming for is purely military, or that any civilian damage would not be disproportionate. Now, obviously, a rocket landing directly on a hospital and a hospital sheltering people who've been evacuated from another site of conflict, that you cannot talk about some sort of proportional military advantage. And indeed, Israel has not claimed that there was any military advantage. They've instead denied that they were responsible for the rocket.
So Israel says it wasn't their rocket that struck the hospital, killing these close to 500 people. It blames Islamic Jihad, but Islamic Jihad is also denying any responsibility. Who then can be trusted to conduct a credible investigation that will ultimately put this to rest?
Well, you'd need to have an independent investigation for which either UN officials, and those would have to be UN officials not affiliated with any of the parties to the conflict, or another outside body would have to be allowed into the area to conduct proper tests. At the moment, that seems unlikely, and we're left with the problem that truth is the first casualty in war. We can only surmise.
Right, and what does it say then when you've got someone as high-ranking as the U.S. president today meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Joe Biden saying, well, he takes their account and that is what he believes to be true. And I wonder what that endorsement from Biden would mean for any sort of independent investigation when clearly a side has already been taken by the allies of either of the parties.
Well, it shows that the independent investigation has to be genuinely independent. President Biden's claim that he believes Israel is meaningless for an independent investigation, that would depend on actually working out forensically where the rockets came from and the missiles came from and you know, the trajectory of the missiles and examining the area. So all President Biden has done by saying that is to put himself into the Israeli camp. He hasn't actually established any of the facts. So that could more or less be ignored by an independent investigation.
And there's a clearer-cut case perhaps to be made for atrocities committed by Hamas in the killing of civilians in that surprise attack on Israel on that Saturday morning, right? Because they went into a town, then started killing people indiscriminately, we're told. You've got a case where Israel says what it's launched is basically a means to defend itself and, quote, eliminate Hamas. But in the process, people are being killed. And the multiple Israeli spokespeople who've gone on international platforms claim that where civilians have been killed is because Hamas was using them as human shields. Is that, in terms of international law, strong enough legal reasoning to explain or defend the killing of possibly thousands of civilians, as we're seeing in Gaza?
No, it is not. The obligation of the attacker, where human shields are concerned, do not change just because the defender is using human shields. So it is a war crime to use human shield as a defender or an attacker, quite frankly. And the attacker, if there are human shields being used, must then recalculate to make sure there is no disproportionate civilian damage. It's perhaps worth putting in here that if we focus on just the hit on the Gaza hospital, then we've got these two conflicting accounts of who was aiming at whom for what. Israel has carpet-bombed areas of Gaza since the conflict began, and its spokesperson of the IDF, Hagari, is on record as having said that the aim of the Israeli military operation is maximum damage rather than accuracy. So I think we need to pan out and look at everything that's happened. I would agree that the direct attacks on civilians by Hamas constitute war crimes. The taking of hostages constitute war crimes. At the same time, we need to look at all the war crimes that Israel might be committing, and not just focus on do we believe them or not on the attack on the hospital.
But what are
so I'm just trying to make sure we're looking at all of the military operations.
And overall then, because this has gone on for more than 10 days, and by all accounts, both the Israeli army and indeed Hamas have been accused of committing war crimes through the killing of civilians, Hamas, as you're saying, through the capture of hostages who are still being held, we understand, somewhere within Gaza. We don't know exactly how many. The number has been put at around 199 by some. Some say it's closer to 250. But overall, for the innocent people who've either been killed, taken hostage, maimed during these 12 days or so of fighting, do you see a real prospect of justice when you consider that, for example, the people accused of committing these crimes aren't signatories to the Rome Statute?
Well, Palestine is a signatory to the Rome Statute.
I'm referring to Hamas and Israel.
But you see, that's the million-dollar question. But Hamas elected government of Gaza in 2006. But its election went more or less unnoticed by many other countries, especially those in the West. And the rest of the world continued to treat the Palestinian Authority as the government of all of Palestine. Remember, Palestine consists of disaggregated bits of land. There's Gaza, there's the West Bank, there's the occupied East Jerusalem. All of those form part of Palestine. And the ICC has accepted as valid a submission to the ICC jurisdiction by the Palestinian Authority. And that would cover Gaza as well. So what happens in Gaza, because it's part of Palestine, would be subject to the jurisdiction of the ICC, assuming you can ever get any of those people actually before court in The Hague. But actually, there is the option of justice here if the ICC chooses to run with these cases.
Cathy Powell, really good to speak to you. Thank you so much, Professor at the University of Cape Town, speaking to us tonight.